This 20,000-year baboon bone is where it all begins. Look closely. Each notch represents something owed, something remembered across time. Debt, credit, trade, money. But money wasn't just notches on a bone. Money rewired our brains. It sculpted societies. It created the very concept of the individual, the idea that you are separate from the tribe, that you can own things, that you have value independent of the collective. Some call it the root of all evil. Others call it the engine of human progress. This bone, a stamped coin, a printed bill, a number on your screen, they're all the same thing. Money is the social technology that took us from cavemen to a man on the moon. But here's what most people don't understand. How did we get from this to this? And what happens to a civilization when money becomes completely invisible? This is the history of money. When most people think of the Bronze Age, they imagine isolated settlements and wild barbarians in between, maybe a dragon or two. In reality, there was a massively connected global economy. Thousands of ships cruised the Indian Ocean. Caravans threaded through high mountain passes. Merchants in bazaars speaking different languages, selling each other exotic goods. But then they had a problem. They didn't have money. Instead, they dealt in trust. Imagine you're a Sumerian merchant in 3000 BC. You've got grain to sell, a lot of it, in fact. A trader from India wants it. He's offering ivory in exchange. But his scales and measures are different. How much grain is a lot? How much ivory is fair? You need a way to agree on value. Here's where trust and early forms of money come in. Meet Kushum, a Sumerian merchant in 3000 BC. Kushum has a clay tablet he uses to track his shipments. 29,000 measures of barley over 37 months. This seemingly mundane note is actually the world's first record of writing. Writing is the norm now, but was a superpower back then. It stored knowledge, did calculations, and created records in a much more mobile way than the human voice. And it was commerce that initially led to writing, because writing inspired trust. The Sumerians created literal spreadsheets to keep track of complex commerce, contracts, and even laws. So next time you're waking up for your 9 a.m. stand-up meeting to go over that monster of an Excel file, think Kushum. However, there's a key piece that we're missing here. Kushum noted 29,000 measures of barley. But how does someone exactly define a measure? Well, Sumerians came up with the concept of a shekel. And no, that's not an anti-Semitic trope here. It was a standard of measurement, usually a stone shaped like a duck. And this is where we start really seeing money come about, through standardization. But here's what's fascinating. Civilizations thousands of miles apart independently arrived at the same solution. While Sumeria had shekel stones, China had cowrie shells, which they obtained from the South China Sea or trade from Indian Ocean peoples. Cowrie shells were light, scarce, and roughly the same size. They even had a shelf life of 100 years. Perfect proto-money. But perhaps the most interesting form of money comes from the Indus Valley Civilization in India. The Indus Valley Civilization was the largest and most populous civilization of the Bronze Age. In addition to having valuable luxury goods like lapis lazuli, ivory, and gold, it had access to an essential alloy of its era, tin. Now, tin was rare. One of the only places it was found was the northern reaches of the Indus Valley Civilization in modern-day Afghanistan. It was used to make bronze weaponry, farmers' tools, and engineering instruments. Tin was essentially the petroleum of its time. As such, the Indus Valley Civilization took advantage of this along with its other goods for trade. India became a juggernaut of international commerce as a result. To organize all this, the ancient Indians created a standardized weight system. Perfect cubes that weighed 13.63 grams were manufactured en masse. From the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, we find these cube weights at machine-like levels of precision, all being the same weight and size. Think about how wild that is. There were no computers, no internet, no industrial manufacturing, yet they produced weights that were identical down to the gram across an area the size of Western Europe. This sophistication created a simplicity for trust. But to really seal the integrity of Indian commerce, we need literal seals. No, not those, I mean these. Not only in India, but also in Sumeria, we find the seals of the Indus everywhere. They have the undeciphered Indus Valley script, along with animals like tigers, elephants, bulls, and unicorns, all signatures of ancient Indian merchants and guilds, signaling reliability and reputation. These were Bronze Age brands. When you combine both of these, seals and standardized weights, you get to the next natural evolution of money in our story: coins. And coins don't just make trade easier. They created something humanity had never really thought of before: the idea of the individual. What if I told you the story of King Midas was real? You know the myth. King Midas gets the golden gift from Dionysus. Everything he touches turns to gold. Sounds great until his food, his drink, even his own daughter become solid gold. Midas begs Dionysus to take it back. So Dionysus tells him to wash in the river Pactolus, and the curse is lifted. But now, the river runs rich with gold. Here's the thing, that river was real. King Midas was probably real as well, and Lydia, his kingdom in what's now Western Turkey, became insanely wealthy because of it. The river Pactolus ran through Lydia carrying electrum, a natural mixture of gold and silver. But this created a problem. Everyone in Lydia had gold. Merchants, farmers, even blacksmiths were cutting up chunks of electrum to trade with. Yet each chunk was different. Different weight, different purity. Is this piece 60% gold or 40%? How do you know if you're not getting cheated? Every single transaction required haggling, weighing, testing. Commerce was chaos as a result. So the Lydians invented something revolutionary: coinage. The first Lydian coins were oval-shaped and stamped with a roaring lion, the symbol of the Lydian king. Look at what this represents: standardized weight, guaranteed purity, and the king's seal promised both. This was the birth of Iron Age branding. The symbol is the value. And as Lydian coins spread across the Mediterranean, something remarkable happened. Kings who controlled the mints controlled the economy. Cities grew as wealth concentrated. For the first time, you could have professional armies, soldiers who fought for pay, not for plunder. Coins created a new kind of power: portable, fungible, and most importantly, universal. However, Lydia may actually not have been the first civilization to invent coins. Remember those Indus Valley seals, those standardized weights? You're literally one step away from a coin. If you stamp your seal onto a standardized metal, then you guarantee the weight and purity with your symbol. Check out these eerie similarities that Rohan Pandey, an AI researcher, found between Indus Valley seals and coins from Ayodhya. A bull with a ritual lamp on both. The gap between them is 2,000 years. That's another level of continuity. Either way, around this time, about 600 BC, both Greece and India developed powerful city-states. And in these cities, powerful institutions began to develop around an idea we take for granted, but back then was mind-blowing: the individual. You see, before coinage, social mobility was limited. With coins, a universal form of value, even someone born into a poor class or caste could demonstrate their worth in a way that was not possible in a barter economy. The focus of society shifted, away from the tribe towards the individual. In Greece, Plato pondered on the concept of psyche, an inner self or soul distinct from the body and social group, yet still a part of it. This mirrored the coin, a distinct form of universal value, yet individual piece by itself. Earlier in India, the sage Yajnavalkya spoke of the concept of the Atman, an invisible self deep in our hearts that yearned for liberation from the body. This Atman, or soul, was part of something greater, the ultimate reality of Brahman. Sounds out there, I know, but think of coins. An individual coin is made of the same material as all others. Looks identical, yet each one is distinct. It's this dichotomy between the individual and universal that plays over and over in Indian and Greek philosophy, both the most monetized and coin-laden of their time. So we see that these aren't just random ideas. They're questions you ask when your society starts treating people as individual units of value. Coinage also brought tremendous power to kings and states. Concentration of wealth meant bigger cities, more spectacular temples, larger armies. With complex bureaucracies built on standardized coinage, we saw the birth of empires as we understand them today. Coins created trust. Trust created power. But no civilization weaponized that power quite like Rome. Because Rome would take this technology, standardized coinage, and turn it into the world's first financial empire. '33 CE. Rome is the most powerful state on Earth. Its legions are unstoppable. Its engineering is unmatched. Its economy is collapsing? Banks start failing. Credit is frozen. Senators, the wealthiest men in the empire, are defaulting on their loans. The entire financial system is on the verge of implosion. Sound familiar? This is Rome's 2008, except it's 2,000 years earlier, and the aftermath would plunge Europe into centuries of darkness. So how did we get here? Let's rewind. 200 BC. Rome is expanding fast, from Italy into Iberia, Greece, North Africa, the Middle East. But expansion is expensive. Legions need pay, infrastructure needs building, rebellions need crushing. The Senate is running out of money. Here's what they came up with. Privatizing conquest. They created these companies called the Publicani and sold their shares to Roman citizens. Rich senators bought in big, while other aristocrats also got a piece. And here's the genius part. These companies got the right to collect taxes in conquered provinces. Think about what this means. A legion conquers Gaul. Publicani shareholders immediately start profiting from Gallic taxes. Your investment literally pays out when Rome wins wars. This is imperialist venture capital. Not only that, but they had a stock market, like an actual stock market in the infamous Roman Forum. Publicani shares were traded daily. Prices fluctuated based on military victories or defeats. Dividends were paid out quarterly. There are even records of hostile takeovers, one company buying out another's shares to seize control of tax collection in a province. Rome's war machine became a financial machine, and Rome grew insanely prosperous. The grandeur of the city blossomed as its senators wallowed in wealth. And even the masses benefited. The phrase bread and circuses comes from this era. Emperors kept the population happy with free grain and entertainment, all funded by this financial infrastructure. But here's the problem with financializing everything. Eventually, someone realizes that the numbers don't exactly add up. And by 33 CE, Roman senators were drowning in debt. They'd borrowed cheap to buy land, borrowed more to invest in Publicani shares, borrowed even more to finance new conquests. Interest rates were so low that debt felt free. Everyone was leveraged to the absolute limit. Enter Emperor Tiberius. Tiberius looks at the Senate's balance sheets and realizes they're completely overextended. These guys are supposed to be funding the empire, and they're one bad quarter away from bankruptcy. So he makes a move. He orders the Senate to liquidate some of their holdings, sell off assets, reduce their exposure. But there's a problem. No one has cash. It's all tied up in land and shares, in loans to far-off provinces. So when senators try to sell, there are no buyers. Land prices collapse. Banks start calling in loans. And because everyone borrowed from everyone else, it's a chain reaction. Credit freezes, banks fail, the richest men in Rome with the flyest threads are suddenly naked. Tiberius realizes the empire is about to implode. If the banking system collapses, legions don't get paid, provinces rebel, and Rome will fall into flames. So he does something unprecedented. He injects 100 million sesterces directly into the banking system. This is the first recorded example of quantitative easing. Government money flooding the credit markets to prevent total collapse. And it works. We see banks stabilizing, credit starts flowing again, and the bread and circuses play on. But here's the catch. Once you've established that the government will bail you out, you've created a terrible precedent. Emperor after emperor does the same thing. Crisis hits, print money. War getting expensive, print money. Need to pay the legions, print more money. Except Rome can't actually print paper money, so they debase their coins, mixing silver with cheaper metals. A little copper here, some tin there. During Tiberius's reign, the denarius was nearly 100% silver. 200 years later, 4% silver. Soldiers are paid in fake money. Merchants won't accept it. Inflation spirals out of control. By 300 CE, Roman coins were worthless. The empire reverts to barter. Legions mutiny because their pay is worthless as provinces break away and the greatest empire on earth finally collapses. There's a series of paintings by Thomas Cole called The Course of Empire. 5 paintings showing the rise and fall of civilization. The first shows wilderness. The last shows ruins. Rome traveled that entire arc, and money, the technology that built the empire, was also the technology that destroyed it. Thus, Europe enters a dark age. For 700 years, the sophistication Rome had built disappeared. No stock markets, no complex lending, no financialization. Until a merchant from Pisa walks into a bazaar in North Africa and sees something he believed was magic. This number didn't exist in Europe. Not because Europeans couldn't figure it out, but because the church banned it. They called it Saracen sorcery, the devil's mathematics, the kind of thing that could get you burned at the stake. And in a way, they were right to be terrified, because this number would transform money in a way no coin ever could. To understand why, let's go to 5th century India. An astronomer named Aryabhat is trying to calculate the circumference of the Earth. But he's got a problem. His complex equations need a number for, well, nothing. So he invents it. He calls it shunya, meaning the void. Little did he know, he just changed the world. A century later, another mathematician named Brahmagupta takes it even further. He makes shunya into a number you can add and subtract with. 0. He adds multiples of 10 across each side. This creates our modern decimal system. But here's why that matters for money. Before decimals, you could count discrete things. 5 coins, 6 coins, 1 bag of silver. After decimals, you could track 5.237 units of value. You could calculate interest to infinite precision. Record debt down to the fraction. Money stopped being just a pile of metal you could hold. It became something you could measure to the dot. So how did it spread? Well, a couple hundred years after Brahmagupta, the Arabian Caliphate conquered India's frontiers. They imported Indian scientists, translating their work and spread it across the Islamic world. While European monks were trying to do long division with Roman numerals, merchants from Malabar to Morocco were doing commerce in Indian numerals. The church basically banned math as we know it today. No wonder Europe was in the dark age back then. That is, until an Italian merchant traveled to a North African bazaar and saw the Saracen magic in action. The young merchant Leonardo Fibonacci noticed that North African merchants finished calculations that should take hours in minutes. So he compiled these magic spells in secret. He comes back to Italy like he's returned from Hogwarts. And he combines his notes into Liber Abaci, the Book of Calculation. But here's the thing. Fibonacci isn't writing for scholars or magicians. He's writing for merchants. This book is full of practical problems. How to convert currencies, how to calculate profit margins, how to split partnership shares, how to figure out compound interest. He's basically giving Italian merchants a GTA cheat code. But one city in particular was paying attention: Florence. The reason for this is that Florence sat right between northern and southern European trade routes. Wool and furs from the north met spices from the south. So its banking families, the Medici, the Bardi, the Peruzzi, saw an opportunity. They set up shop in the plaza with their bancos, literal benches where they exchange money. But there's a big problem. International trade means dealing with dozens of different currencies: Phoenician ducats, Byzantine bezants, Arab dinars, English pennies. Every single unit has a different weight, different purity, different value, that's fluctuating by the day. Every transaction becomes this negotiation about what's actually worth what. It's chaos, and it's slowing everything down. So in 1252, the Florentines do something radical. They mint a new coin, the florin, 24-karat gold, consistent weight, no debasement, no variation. And because Florence sits at the center of so much European trade, the florin spreads. Within a generation, merchants from London to Cairo are using it as their standard. It became the reserve currency of the medieval world. Yet the real innovation isn't the coin itself. It's what the Florentines do by combining that standardized gold-backed currency with the decimal mathematics they learned from Fibonacci. As Florentine banks hoarded gold to melt into florins, they had to create better techniques to keep track of everything. So to start, Florentine bankers invented double entry booking, assets on one side, liabilities on the other, balanced to a decimal point. Most significantly, people trusted the banks of Florence so much that a Florentine bank could issue a letter of credit claiming that Mario has X amount of gold in our Florentine vault, so accept his payment. Ironically, a 24-karat gold coin was causing money to divorce from metal. It's not a physical object anymore. The Florentines figured out something profound. Money isn't a thing. Money is an agreement. And as long as everyone believed that a piece of paper represented gold, you actually didn't need gold physically with you. For 2 centuries, Florence has run European finance. Rich families like the Medici patronized artists, philosophers, and inventors, creating the Renaissance. But then 1453 happens. The Ottomans take Constantinople. Eastern trade routes close overnight. Florence's geographic advantage starts collapsing, as does its financial paradise. Europe seemed poised to return to another dark age. Yet a miracle occurs. A new land is found far west, one that is abundant and ripe for adventure as well as investment. The center of gravity shifts. The Mediterranean gives way to the Atlantic. Now the future belongs to whoever can control Atlantic trade. And surprisingly, it's not going to be Spain or Portugal, even though they discovered the New World. It's going to be this weird little small swampy republic in Northern Europe that no one took seriously. The Dutch are about to take everything Florence invented, the standardized currency, the abstract financial instruments, the mathematical precision, and they're going to build something that's never existed before, a central bank. The rise of the Dutch all begins with this ship. It's called a fluit. You see, before the Netherlands became a financial power, it was a collection of provinces in a swamp. The land was wet and rough, so the Dutch had to engineer ways to actually live on it. Dikes, windmills, and land reclamation, literally pushing the sea back to create more ground. But this had a knock-on effect. Skills in engineering eventually transferred to shipbuilding. By the 1600s, the Dutch had the best of them. And in 1670, the Dutch fleet was bigger than the fleets of England, France, and Spain combined. But why did they need all these ships? Well, the answer lies in a rebellion. Dutch provinces used to be part of the Spanish Habsburg Empire. But then they decided they weren't into paella or Catholicism and rebelled. This kicked off a war that lasted 80 years. And for a war that long, they needed cash. The problem was the Dutch didn't really have any major resources to fund this rebellion. So they did something radical. They opened their borders. And not just for capital, but also people, especially persecuted people. Portuguese Jews, French Huguenots, Flemish Protestants, and others all poured in. And here's the thing, these weren't regular refugees. They were wealthy merchants, skilled craftsmen, and educated intellectuals. They brought capital and expertise with them. Within a generation, Amsterdam went from swampy backwater to a major European financial center. But with all this diversity and capital flowing in, the Dutch would face a similar problem to Florence. Too many different coins were circulating in the merchant republic. The Dutch solution was to centralize things. They created a central bank, the Wissel Bank, and currency, the Dutch florin, to settle all financial matters. But there's a twist here. For the florin wasn't simply a physical coin, it was also a form of credit. Here's how it went. You give all your different coins to the Wissel Bank. The bank weighs them and determines their purity for actual gold and silver content. And finally, the whistle bank gives you credit in the form of bank florins. But these florins were physical receipts. They were proof of money in the most trusted bank in Europe, perhaps the world at that point. Money went from metal to information. Some merchants began treating these receipts like cash, but most people didn't really trust it fully. The psychological leap for a random piece of paper was just too big. But the Dutch weren't done innovating. They created a public stock market, one not just for the elites, but also for the common man. The Dutch democratized finance. Money poured into companies like the Dutch East India Company, whose colonial exploits made Dutch and foreign investors wealthy beyond imagination. The Dutch East India Company became the richest company in human history. Adjusted for inflation, it was worth more than Apple, Google, and Microsoft combined. Now, this all sounds really awesome, but the most important part in our chapter actually comes from the most mundane, the receipt. While some Dutch used the receipt like paper money, most did not. This idea of paper money actually had to travel across the English Channel to really take root. And how it did would transform not just money, but politics forever. For in 1688, the Dutch Prince William of Orange invaded England and conquered it without much bloodshed, mostly because the English were sick of their Catholic king and wanted a Protestant ruler. He brought along Dutch financiers and intellectuals. King William's England, now fearful of a French invasion, needed to raise money for the impending war. So they copied the Dutch playbook. The English created a central bank and stock market to raise funds. But there was one key difference. While the Whistle Bank had currency backed by gold, English currency would be backed by government debt. Here's how money really becomes modern. Firstly, the Bank of England would announce a need for, say, £1 million for war. Then citizens would line up at the Bank of England to give money. Yes, like a literal loan to the government. The Bank of England would then give you a banknote, promising to pay you back with interest at a later date. English merchants began trading banknotes, using it to buy things, and even accepting it as payment. Thus, over time, banknotes became a currency, a paper money, the most liquid form of money we'd ever seen. And remember, this money was backed by the government, not by gold. People believed in the money because they believed in the capability of the government, and they were right. England successfully defended itself from a French invasion. Victory validated the system. And as England grew, as its empire spread across the world, so did this idea. Paper money backed by government debt. Within a century, paper currency became the norm across Europe and its colonies. Money has completed its journey from physical object to pure information, from notches on a bone to numbers on paper, backed by nothing but collective belief. For thousands of years, money was something you could hold. Gold, silver, coins with weight and substance. Now it's just ink, a promise, just an agreement that we'll all pretend this paper means something. But there's one final transformation still to come. Because even paper money is too physical, it's too real. So what's the last step? Making money disappear entirely. After World War II, the world's economies were in ruins, except one, America. The US had 2/3 of the world's gold reserves. So in 1944, representatives from 44 countries met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and created a new system. The US dollar became the world's reserve currency. Every other currency pegged to the dollar. And the dollar was backed by gold at $35 per ounce. America promised, bring us dollars, we'll give you back gold. That was the deal. And for 2 decades this worked. The dollar was as good as gold because it was gold, just paper wrapped. But then the 1960s happened. The Vietnam War caused massive deficits. America was printing more dollars than it had gold to back them. And other countries started to take notice. France in particular. The president, Charles de Gaulle, looked at America's books and realized that they don't have enough gold for all those dollars. So France did something audacious. They started aggressively converting dollars to gold. French warships literally sailed to New York, loaded up American gold, and shipped it back to Paris. Other countries saw this and thought, maybe we should start doing this too. By 1971, America's gold reserves were hemorrhaging. So President Nixon had two choices: admit America was broke or end the system entirely. And on August 15th, 1971, Nixon appeared on TV Sunday evening and announced the US was temporarily suspending the convertibility of dollars to gold. Temporarily. In reality, it's been over 50 years. In that moment, money as humanity knew it for 5,000 years ended. The dollar became pure fiat, money by decree, money backed by nothing except collective belief. For thousands of years, money had weight, notches on bone, stamped metal, paper receipts for metal in a vault. Now, money became numbers in a computer. Your paycheck isn't gold, it's not even paper really. It's a database entry. Money became software. You can create it with keystrokes, move trillions instantly. Some even question whether governments are needed at all. But that debate is for another video. Or just go on Twitter and look at all the flame wars about cryptocurrency. We started with a 20,000-year-old bone. We end with money that has no physical form, just a collective hallucination. And it works. Money shaped human consciousness, created the individual. It built empires. It transformed us from tribes to civilizations. But now it's invisible. The most powerful social technology in human history has completely dematerialized, which raises a question. What happens when the thing that mediates all human cooperation is just shared belief and nothing more? Well, we're living through that answer. Money isn't real. It never was. It was always just a story that we told ourselves. The bone, the grain, the coin, the paper, the screen. Different chapters in the same story. Let's see where the tale takes us next. This has been the history of money.